All right, we're back here on the Chase Thomas podcast, where I am now joined by someone who does a really good job putting together some video stuff that, like, I see the question and I'm like, all right, he's got me, because now I want to watch to see what Quinn Ewers is doing, and it's really good. You're really good at the branding and getting that stuff together, and I like your setup. You got some cool helmet situations going on behind you, and yeah, it's cool to have someone who does college football film study that I learn from, that I feel like I always learn something when I check out his videos. It's JD Pickell, who is here this evening. JD, what's going on, man?
Man, I'm doing phenomenal. I appreciate you hyping me up and getting me some good some good PR there. But in terms of the helmets, man, that is all our production team. So I can't
Mhm.
take too much credit for that. They make me look a lot better than I am. But man, I'm fired up to be on with you and talk some ball.
Absolutely, absolutely. But you did, like, we should give the listeners, so for the podcast, for the folks who are not familiar with JD to this point yet, you will be more familiar as the years go on. I can guarantee you that in the college football landscape. But you played at Cornell, and then you transferred to Baylor. Two very, very different schools, I guess, and two different college experiences, right? Like, what were based on, I know it's been a little bit, but like, for you, what was the biggest difference going from an Ivy League school to a Big 12, still at the time, Power 5 school? What was the biggest difference?
Yeah, man. Biggest difference would have had to be just, I think, the level of seriousness revolving around football. Like, the Ivy League is awesome. I have nothing
Hmm.
bad to say about the Ivy League, but your special treatment stops once you get into school. Like,
Hmm.
there's no priority registration, there's no athlete dining hall, there's no athlete dorms. Like, once you're in, it's like, hey, we did our part, you're in. Like, you wouldn't have gotten in here without us. And which is very true. And then at Baylor, it's like, hey, if you miss lunch, you're in trouble. But like at Cornell, it's like, hey, practice is over. I hope you get back to the dining hall in time
Hmm.
before the dining hall's closed. Like, so it's just, I think that the level of seriousness, and not to say it's a negative thing about Cornell, but in terms of the budgeting and the resources going towards the program at Baylor, like, there's a lot of money going into that program, and so it should be a serious thing. But I have nothing bad to say about either experience. Was fortunate to be able to be a part of the Baylor program for a really short time. I had to actually retire
Hmm.
for concussions, so I had a few too many bumps on the noggin. But regardless, man, when it changed a thing, and blessed to be able to have those experiences.
When you were telling folks that you were like, hey, when you were in high school and you're like, I'm still trying to figure out where I'm going to go play college ball at, and you were like, you know what? I think I'm going to go up north. I think I'm going to be a Cornell Big Red. That's what I'm doing. Where people are like, you're going where? To play football? Like, that's what you're doing? Do they
Yeah,
have
man.
football?
Yeah, so I mean the reference you get 9 times out of 10 is,
Andy
oh, like
Bernard?
The Office. And it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, like The Office. But yeah, my story with recruiting was sort of interesting in the sense that it became pretty clear towards the beginning of my senior summer, I guess it was junior summer, that it wasn't going to be a Power Five program. It wasn't going to
Mm.
be, an SEC school or anything like that. So I was like, okay, where can I get the most out of my college experience, get the most, and still play Division One ball, because that was for me a level I thought I could play at, and it was
Mm.
non-negotiable for me. So I was like, how can I play D1 ball, whether it's a walk on or whether I'm going to get an offer somewhere. And so, yeah, I was fortunate to be able to kind of get the best of both worlds in Cornell, and David Archer's done a phenomenal job with that program, and it's fun to put on that sweatshirt every Saturday, man, and watch him go at it.
Who's the number one rival for Cornell? Is it Dartmouth?
So Columbia is
Columbia.
the
Okay.
only other program in our conference in that same state. So we
Right.
play for the Empire State Bowl every year, and that's a lot of fun.
Is it a literal thing? Do you get a literal trophy when you
Oh
win?
yeah, oh yeah, man.
Okay.
We got trophy games with Columbia, and then Governor's Cup with Penn. So like those two games you could classify as rivals. But I mean, nobody likes Harvard, Yale, or Princeton. Like there's no friends in the Ivy League for sure.
Interesting. Very
Yeah,
cool. Very
it is
cool.
interesting. It's something, man. It's still football, and it's a blast, and like the the pageantry is different, but I would say the tradition and the rivalries and the things that are just at a base level fun about college football are there across every conference, which is a blast. So yeah, a different taste for sure, but I loved it.
What do they run? What did y'all run a lot at Cornell?
Like offensively,
Yeah, what y'all run? What kind of personnel were y'all doing a lot of?
yeah, we were pretty multiple. We do a lot of 20 personnel, so we'd have two
Hmm.
backs in the game and put me at the slot, or we would. put me out wide and catch a smoke screen, and then we do a good amount of just like spread, typical inside zone.
Hmm.
They've done some more unique stuff recently, done like the triple option, and so it really is just like a conference where you can be pretty multiple with whatever you want to run, and yeah, it's a blast. It's a lot of fun.
There you go. Mutation. You had to guess that was going to pop up in the Ivy League.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to talk, and not some Ivy League, on this very podcast because it's Big 12 country where your bread and butter is now. And like you said, playing at Baylor, have a strong familiarity with the Baylor program. They win the Big 12 this past year on a crazy ending to the Oklahoma State Baylor Big 12 game. And like that had just all kinds of ramifications after that. And just a crazy ending. One of my favorite endings and one of my favorite games of the past year, but it was a complete 180 from what we saw from year one with Dave Aranda, where it was like, oh, he like the Larry Fedora hire. We were like, okay, he's back to Texas. Like he knows offense. Things didn't end well at UNC, but going back to the Big 12, he runs the offense. Aranda runs the defense. It made sense from an outside observer. Where you're like, okay, I can understand this. This line of thinking here if you're Baylor to replace Matt Rule. And then it doesn't work. And not only does it not work, it really doesn't work where you're like, oh man, this is like, you cannot do this in back-to-back years. Baylor is not that program where it's like, we're going to give you a long leash to figure this out and just bet on you anymore. It's like, no, we're Baylor now. We can just go find someone better. We have this commitment to excellence now. We believe that we should be at the top of the Big 12 year over year. And he's like, all right, well, let me just go get Jeff Grimes from BYU. Like he did some awesome stuff with Zach Wilson, and we can figure stuff out there and just drastically change our offense in one offseason. Just completely run a different scheme, different personnel, different type of play style altogether. And it worked. Were you surprised to see just how seamless the transition was from Fedora in year one to what Jeff Grimes did in year two, at Baylor?
I think the biggest surprise was how well it worked and how quickly it worked, because there's two pieces to this. One, there wasn't a whole lot of room to get worse. And so that was the first part. It was like, hey, whatever you throw out there, the offense will likely look a little bit more competent. And the second piece was this style of offense they were installing, which is the wide zone. We can definitely get into that if you want to as we progress in this episode. But to give it like the 30,000-foot view, it makes the picture for the quarterback easier, and it makes, in a perfect world, second and third down easier from a down and distance perspective. And so it gave Baylor an identity offensively. And so for that reason alone, you're thinking, okay, if they can get it right a couple of places, they're going to be in position to win games as long as that defense shows up. And that was kind of the thing for even the first year. I mean, the defense was great. Like the defense was really, really solid, even in that 2-win season. And so to be able to pair a competent and at times really good offense with an elite defense, I think is why you saw what you got to see on the field. So to answer your question, definitely something that came together a lot more quickly than people thought, myself included. But the fact that it was improvement, the fact that Dave Aranda turned it around, I think a lot of people were expectant of that.
I wonder too, because like having talked to a lot of college coaches and high school coaches and just like how insane the 2022 offseason or 2020 offseason was, where like the installs were just not there, not having full camps, not being able to really get acclimated to your players, to the system, to the area, that I wonder, like Baylor's one of those what ifs to me where it's like, if you're Larry Fedora, are you like, hey man, like I didn't get what Jeff Grimes got this offseason. Like I didn't get to come in and we didn't get this situation where, I mean, there were still some protocols still in place last summer, but it was not even close to what it was like in 2020. So do you think that, like, if they had given Fedora a full offseason and he got a full walkthrough to really get guys and get the guys he wants in the portal or wherever, that it still could have worked playing that style? Or do you think that they couldn't risk it because like if they risk it and it's still not better, then Aranda and Fedora are gone after 2 years?
So that was my initial reaction was, whoa, this is not a reliable sample size. There's been COVID. Guy didn't even get a full offseason to install his stuff. The thing that I think is most condemning to me is in that offense, if you go back and look at those box scores, they're throwing it like 40 times a game and not even trying to run the football. And they have an offensive line that's kind of makeshift and patched up together. And so for that reason, I was like, okay, there needs to be some different approach offensively, whether it's with Fedora or without Fedora. Whatever's happening right here isn't working. And credit a lot to Dave Aranda for having the decisiveness to say, nope, this isn't going to work. I don't care about the sample size. We're going to go another direction because what we're doing here is not the answer. And I think we've seen from a lot of different decisions Aranda's made, from switching Abram Smith to linebacker to running back, and now making, I don't want to say controversial, but a call that a lot of us didn't see coming with making Blake Shapen the quarterback as opposed to 2021 starter in Gary Bohannon. I think people understand, okay, there is no knee-jerk reaction with Dave Aranda. He's extremely thoughtful. He's extremely calculated. Everything he does has a lot of logic behind it. And so for that reason, I feel a lot more comfortable, especially, I guess, in hindsight, it's 2020, but I felt comfortable that, okay, if he's making a switch, there's a lot of reasons behind that, not just the offseason.
Were you surprised to see him go Blake and not Gary?
I was. I thought that Gary Bohannon is 12-2 as a starter, done nothing wrong for you in terms of what he does on the football field. I mean, he hasn't had a perfect, track record. He's not, irreplaceable in that sense. But at the same time, I was one of those people where I was like, hey, man, it's Gary's job until something happens. I mean, he led you to a Big 12 title when you had 2 wins the year before. And, I mean, credit to Dave Aranda for having the decisiveness to say, nope, Blake won this job in camp, in spring camp. Gary, you're going to have a chance to go and play next year because we're announcing this before May 1st. And he would have had every advantage if he had said, hey, competition is going to go into fall. Gary, you and Blake battle it out. We'll decide before game 1. And I mean, I think that speaks to his character that he let a guy like Gary Bohannon know, who's given so much to a program like Baylor. So I was definitely surprised, though, to see that they made that call in the spring. And there must have been a lot happening behind closed doors to give them the confidence to name Blake Shapen the starter.
I mean, it was wild because that was something you just don't see. Like, Tennessee obviously has to go through that a little bit, and it helps that Hooker and Joe Milton are close. So you're like, all right, they're probably not going anywhere. But you got to keep Taven happy. You got to keep Taven Jackson, who's coming in as a 4-star spring ball guy. Like the Nico stuff is looming everything, but it's like until he gets there, until you got it, there is so much more to manage as a college football coach than there used to be. And the May 1st deadline is so interesting that a lot of coaches we have this idea of like, oh, it makes so much more sense to be the coach who just is like, you praise everybody. I think James Franklin went out of his way to just like name every single player just played extremely well in spring ball and was just like, I'm keeping everybody. Like, I'm keeping everybody happy, and this is how I'm going to do things. I don't want anybody in the portal. But like you said, Dave Aranda took a different approach. I wonder, do you think that might have some positive things down the line for them, that he did Gary a solid and that will look good for him in the future? Like, that was kind of like him, not to go cynical of like he wanted to lay the groundwork for future benefit the doubt stuff, but it is something where it's like players talk, and this being out there is like, you can trust Dave Aranda because he will be completely honest with you and straightforward about where you're at in the program, where he thinks things are going. And then like, he's going to do right by you because ultimately that's just the kind of guy he is, right?
I think it has to. And not only players within the program and the portal, but also high school recruits. I mean, if you're going to preach person over player and stand on that, you have to be able to back it up and say, and be able to point to different instances where you've taken the person over the player. And I think this is a perfect example of that, of him, like you said, doing Gary Bohannon a favor and giving him one more year of college football, where it would have been him, benefiting if he had been able to keep it on his roster. Because now Baylor has a redshirt freshman behind a guy like Blake Shapen, who got hurt in his second game of action. So there is definitely a gamble in a sense, to just from a sheer numbers perspective of experience. Like, this was not an advantageous play for Dave Aranda. This was not what they would tell you to do in the coaching textbook 101, So I think it has to play well for him. And if anything, I think it just speaks to the authenticity of a guy like Dave Aranda. Like, a lot of college coaches are going to try and sort of play the game in the portal and NIL, and we've seen that already. But I really think it speaks volumes to the character of Dave Aranda. And even if you don't like Baylor, even if you're the mortal enemy of a Texas or a TCU or an Oklahoma, wherever you fall in that matter, I think you respect Dave Aranda for doing right by a guy like Gary Bohannon.
Do you think Dave Aranda is comfortable at Baylor long term? Is this not necessarily a destination job, but do you think he sees it as a job that he can win and get in the playoff at least a couple times, or just with where the Big 12 is going? Do you think he is comfortable being the Baylor football coach for the foreseeable future?
I think so. I think it's a really good fit. And if
Mm,
it were a destination job, last year would have been the year to make a play somewhere else, right?
mm.
With USC being open, Florida being open, looked like Michigan might have been open for a second. I
LSU was
mean, there were
open.
there were so many things that happened to where if you were going to jump ship and take a job that was more attractive, last year would have been the year to do it. And also, if you're Dave Aranda, you're saying, "Hey, man, I kind of did what I was supposed to do here at Baylor." Like they won a Big 12 title, something that hadn't happened here, and I want to say it was like 5 or 6 years. I mean,
Mm.
he did everything at Baylor that has been done. So now for him to say, we're going to win a Big 12 title and then improve on that and try and push for a postseason berth and the playoff and things like that, I think he understands that he's a fit at Baylor. And I don't know that his personality fits everywhere else. That's not to say he couldn't go somewhere else and crush it. I mean, I think he could go to any school in the country and be a success. But for him, from a comfortability standpoint, I think Waco fits him really well. And I think he fits Waco really well.
Does the personnel and the returning talent make you believe that this is a team that can win the Big 12 back-to-back years?
It's a phenomenal question. The personnel alone gives me some pause because they lost a lot of production. Like
Mm,
Abram Smith is gone, who's an all conference back. Treston Ebner is a big piece of that offense. He's gone. Now you're going with a different starting quarterback. And then that defense, which really carried a lot of the load for them last year, is going to have a lot of new faces on it. And so I trust Dave Aranda. I think as long as Dave Aranda's on the sideline, they're going to have a really good chance and be competitive in every game just from an X's and O standpoint. But it'll be a new crowd for sure. And so that personnel itself, like I said, gives me pause, but I have a hard time believing they're ever out of it with Aranda on the sideline.
hmm. I'm excited to see what they're building there and where they're going to go, but it is something to monitor because I think it's just going to be interesting with a lot of change, and Big 12 is going to look a lot more different this year. But what do you think of Iowa State? So we were talking about losing production, and Baylor loses some, obviously Abram Smith and company that you talked about, but also, I mean, it is Iowa State is in a really interesting position now. Purdy, Brees Hall, a lot of guys that Matt Campbell could count on to keep this thing humming, because Iowa State and winning in Ames consistently is tough to do. Like, just go through the history of Iowa State football, and it's Matt Campbell has just done the Lord's work up there in Ames, and he is now going to be tested again. Like, they got a southpaw under center this year, more mobile, bigger dude, very different than what Brock Purdy was doing the last couple of years in Ames. But do you think Iowa State is going to be like, this is a crazy question to ask, but when I was going through the roster and just going through where they're at right now, I don't think bowl eligibility is like a guarantee this year. Like, this is going to
Wow.
be
Yeah.
such an interesting season for me, for Matt Campbell and this Cyclones team, because it's going to be like, if he wins 8 games, it's like, just build the statue. Like, if he does that, like, just build the statue for Matt Campbell and Ames. But I am so curious. I'm not saying this is going to be the case, but I think if they went 4-8, and a lot of people are like, whoa, what happened in Ames this year? It's like, look at the roster, man. Like, look at where they're at, and I could see it. What about you?
I think them not being bowl eligible would definitely surprise me, right? Like
Mm,
that would be something that would be out of left field to me, but I think it's a valid point to make. They're replacing so much. And so I'll go on record and say I think they will make a bowl. I think Ames is a hard place to play. I don't think people like coming to Ames. I think
mm,
that'll be good in itself for a couple of wins they wouldn't have if they were on the road. But I mean, this is going to be the year where Matt Campbell proves once again that he is a Iowa State guy through and through, and he's going to make his money this year. Because again, just to what I was saying a second ago about Aranda, Matt Campbell, it sounds like from what we heard, had a chance to take some other jobs and be
mm.
in a more favorable location, more favorable location to recruit from, to live at. I mean, there was a lot of things probably on the table for Matt Campbell, and so credit to him for wanting to stay in Ames. But yeah, they're going to have their work cut out for them. I'm excited though, because Iowa State's a program that even within the Big 12 is kind of fun to root for just because of what they don't have. Like, I don't know how you recruit to a place like
Mm.
Ames, Iowa, truthfully, but they continue to do it. They just landed another 4-star quarterback.
Yeah.
So I think they're going to have some OKGs, some our kind of guys in the chamber, but they're all going to be really raw, and a lot of guys that have very dry feet, so they'll get them wet this fall. But I'm excited to watch it. I think they'll make a bowl just based on being in Ames. I think they'll make a bowl with Matt Campbell, but who knows?
And hey, they deserve credit for being the one of the two Iowa schools to actually attempt to be somewhat competitive offensively. Like that's a
Yeah.
cool thing that they try and do. That a certain other school just has no interest in providing their elite defense with any sort of help on the opposite side of the ball.
Yeah, usually good for the under though, every now and then.
Oh, that is true. That is
Yeah.
true. When you look at Sonny Dykes at TCU, when you look at where the Big 12 is, we'll get into Texas in a second, but where do you see the hierarchy? Do you have different tiers already in your mind where you're like, okay, this is a tier one based on the roster and personnel and the quarterback play that I think they'll have, or like, do you have different tiers in your mind right now with where certain teams are heading into 2022 in the Big 12?
Man, I don't. I think if I were to have tiers, it's probably a two-team top tier with Oklahoma and Baylor sitting right at the top.
Hmm.
But we talked about it on our program. There's just so many question marks. Like
Hmm.
everything we thought we knew about the Big 12 has changed in an offseason. I mean, look at Oklahoma. It was a foregone conclusion a year ago they were going to be playing for a national title.
Yeah.
Lincoln Riley leaves, Caleb Williams leaves. Who knows what's going on at Texas? A lot of those chips are riding on Quinn Ewers being able to come through for them. Baylor will now have a new starting quarterback and lose
Hmm.
everybody on defense, and Iowa's replacing their whole team. Iowa State's replacing their whole team. So I'm excited. I think it'll be a great year for the Big 12. I think there'll be
Hmm.
a lot of cannibalism within the conference. So for that reason, I don't know that it will get the national credit that probably it should when it's all said and done. I think you could very well see a season like last year where you have a two-loss conference champion, and that
Hmm.
doesn't bid well for the playoff and doesn't look great nationally, but the game itself too is starting to trend more and more towards that Big Ten style of we're going to play double tight end, we're going to
Yeah.
use a fullback, we're going to play tough defense, and so that in itself I think competes well nationally, but within the conference, I think they're just going to absolutely kill each other. So it's going to be fun to watch.
Well, we should also mention like Texas Tech brings in the longtime Baylor assistant, Texas high school coaching legend, and Joey Mcguire. We have no idea what he's going to do. Like we have no idea how he'll be as a
Mm.
head coach right away in Lubbock. And then you have Sonny Dykes getting the TCU job. That seems like probably the easiest bounce back. Like if I had to guess who of the new coaches has the best bounce back in the Big 12, like who would I bet on to win more games than the year before? It'd probably be Sonny Dykes at TCU. Like he's not, it's so interesting that like he to me was not a sexy hire whatsoever, but it's like it's consistent where TCU is like this dude knows the area, the offense is going to be good, it's going to put butts in seats, and the floor is significantly higher with Sonny Dykes than if you take a flyer. Like I wanted Ladainian Thompson. I wanted Deion Sanders at TCU so bad. Like that was like my just I want to see him at a Power 5 school now, and I want like that would just be the coolest thing to see Deion in the Big 12, but I don't know. Like maybe that can happen still down the line. I don't know. But then you throw in the wrinkle of JT Daniels. Like it's interesting you bring up the multiple tight end sets that a lot of teams are running in the Big 12. The dirty little secret is it's been a defense league for the last couple of years. Now you get Brent Venables in there for just a little bit because Oklahoma obviously is not going to be in the Big 12 much longer. But Oklahoma State is dominated. And Oklahoma State's just like, we're Utah East. That's what we're going to be. We're just going to have an elite defense. We're going to run the football. We're going to play ugly football. You're not going to like it. And we're going to beat the Blue Bloods that just don't take us seriously enough. And Mike Gundy, all he does is death, taxes, and I'm going to win 10 games every other year. And he's consistent. And this Oklahoma State team was one bad just kind of read on that. Like if you cut back it, like we don't have to relitigate what happened in that Baylor last play, but like 9 times out of 10 he scores on that play, and then you're in the playoff, and it's like Oklahoma State got to a playoff game, and that's just bonkers. But Spencer Sanders struggled, and it was just the Mike Gundy offense is not. It's not the Zach Robinson era in Stillwater anymore. But then you have JT Daniels, where Graham Harrell comes in. So now Neil Brown was running like kind of more of that what you're and they're like, no. We're bringing in Graham Harrell, and we're getting back to Rich Rod era. We're putting butts in seats. This is going to be fun. Neil Brown, I appreciate you trying the Alabama way and ground and pound, but we're going to go get JT Daniels, and we're going to throw the ball all over the place again. That's what people want. They want Pat White. We've seen enough Pat White jerseys in the stands and Steve Slayton and everything else that this is not going to work. So yeah, Daniel Holgerson didn't work out, but we need something like that. I don't know. Out of TCU, West Virginia, and Texas Tech, who do you think wins the most games of that three next year?
Dude, this is going to surprise you, and I
Mm-hmm.
say this because of having more time close to him at
Mm-hmm.
Baylor. Joey Mcguire is the real deal.
Mhm.
Like in terms of what you want in a head coach, a guy that's going to handle culture, because the head coaches are handling culture. They're the CEOs. They're going to hire good staff. They're going to hire coordinators. This, I hesitate to say it for this season because I think it'll be a longer term, but Texas Tech's going to be legit, man. Like they already had, I think maybe it was a week ago, and I think they just got passed up by somebody else, but they had the number one recruiting class in 2023, which you're talking about Texas Tech, a school that hasn't had that in like 30 years. Like that is unbelievable. It's uncharted territory for Texas Tech being all the way in Lubbock, Texas. So if I had to pick games for this year, like your question asked, I would have a hard time picking against JT Daniels because I think he's so dynamic. I kind of like the fact that West Virginia is going to zag when the entire conference zigs. So I think that could play well for them. And in a lot of ways, too, we've seen year after year, great quarterback play gets you pretty far, regardless of what conference you're in. And I guess that's kind of ironic seeing as Georgia won the national championship and there's a question mark within their own fan base about who's playing quarterback. But, man, so I guess to answer your question, I'll go on record. I'll say West Virginia wins more games. But in terms of being a power, I would not be shocked in the slightest if Texas Tech wins a Big 12 title in the next 3 to 4 years. Like I feel that strongly about Joey Mcguire.
Well, it's also they brought in the Western Kentucky offensive coordinator, correct?
Didn't Mcguire pull him? They're gonna air it out too.
Yeah, and that was an immediate where Western Kentucky was like, what if we just bought an entire staff and brought them over for a year? And that's what they did. And they won a bowl game and beat App State, and Bailey Zappi just throws all over the place. And then Texas Tech was like, okay, we'll just do that too. And I like the staff. Like you said, I think that's just one that's going to take a little bit of time before the wins pop up. But I would not be surprised. And then the biggest wild card of all, you bring up quarterback play, it's Adrian Martinez at Kansas State. Like the 5-star pedigree, what he did at Nebraska, he would do the dumb fumble stuff. Like the Illinois game was like the perfect encapsulation of what Adrian Martinez was at Nebraska, where just the boneheaded plays right before the half, and then he'll do the 75-yard touchdown. Oh my God. Like he should be a Heisman guy. Like there's no reason that this guy should not be one of the best quarterbacks in the country, but it's not there all the time. But then you throw him in the Chris Kleiman system and what Kansas State does, and you're like, I think people need to put Adrian Martinez back on their radar. Like I could see him being really good at K-State this year. Could you?
Oh, 1,000%. I think you articulated that perfectly. It might have been in Scott Frost's system maybe too wide open for him. Like the guy is such a phenomenal athlete. He's amazing with the ball in his hands, has a really good arm, maybe a little bit inconsistent with decision-making and accuracy, but like is a pretty good thrower of the football when it needs to be. And so if they can make this system a little more binary for him and allow him to have more set up throws to where the windows aren't going to be as tight and he can kind of just go off play action and throw it to whoever it is that's downfield. Maybe it's, Malachi Knowles or whoever it is. I think he has a chance to be really, really good. I mean, especially with how great he is at running the football. That's something they're going to ask him to do a lot at Kansas State. Like that's quarterback rushing touchdown capital of the world. I mean, just ask Colin Klein. So I'm excited.
Still the OC, right?
He's got. I mean, he's got to be in contention for some postseason accolades if they can be competitive on defense, keeping games. I'm really excited to see that marriage because that is more so like we were talking about, going to be more of the ground and pound side of what the Big 12 is going to look like, and they're that year every single year. I mean, you could look back 5-6 years, the same Kansas State team, just a different guy playing quarterback. So. I'm excited for him. I think you hit that on the head, though. He's going to be dynamic in that offense.
The biggest, I guess, young wild card, and we'll end on this with Texas. So you watched the Quinn Ewers tape. You watched the spring game. Hudson Card, they're keeping happy for right now. They want Hudson Card in this quarterback room come the fall. I don't know. What did you see? Do you see enough there where it's like Quinn Ewers is the real deal and that he should be the guy right away? Do you think he's still a year away? Like where are you at with Quinn Ewers and and what kind of fit you think he'll ultimately be going from Ryan Day and what Kevin Wilson ran versus what he'll be running in Sark's scheme this year?
Yeah, from a scheme perspective, I think he is the right fit. Like I think he is going to be really good once that whole recipe sort of gets mixed together and put in the oven and goes through a full bake. The thing that I'm worried about for Quinn Ewers is the guy has everybody in the world, even if you don't care about Texas, watching him and watching how he translates and watching every single move he makes. I mean, talk about that throw he made in the spring game to Nair, and that was like, feels like it was trending.
Mhm.
So I worry about if he's not your guy game one, Quinn Ewers is still like 19 years old. What does that do to his psyche? How, I hate to use the word fragile, but how volatile is his confidence if he's not the guy in game one? Because that was the pitch, I'm sure, when he decided to go back to UT was come here, be the guy, be QB1. We're going to build around you. You're going to play early. You're going to play game one. And so if that doesn't happen, I wonder how he will respond to that. I think Hudson Card's probably there to stay regardless. The word that I heard was he got into McCombs, the business school, which is a big deal, and I'm sure he's happy to be able to be
Huh.
a UT business student. I think that probably keeps him there, at least until he graduates. But yeah, man, I think the verdict is very much out on what happens if he's not your guy game one. And I'm of the opinion he needs to be the guy game one, just to say, hey, we're going to take our lumps with you, Quinn Ewers. We're going to build around you. We're going to just buy into everything that the Quinn Ewers Festival entails. It might be a 40-point loss to Alabama, but we're going to grow with you and we're going to just keep believing in you. You got a long leash. That's what I think needs to happen. But from a fit standpoint, skill set I think is off the charts.
I lied. I have one last thing for you, just because
I love
I'm
it.
a
I
UT
love
guy.
it, man. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You did some film study on Nico. Ia Maliava. The only way to say it is you gotta hesitate after the Ia. You gotta hesitate, and it's not one you can say fast. But he's on the way in Knoxville next year. What have you seen from him that, like, do you see him with more upside? I don't know how much tape you've watched of Arch and Malik, but like, is there a chance that he's the best quarterback in his class and that Tennessee might have the best quarterback prospect since Peyton?
Yeah, without a doubt. I think without a doubt that's the case. I think from his athleticism standpoint, his arm feels more live than Arch's. Now, I'm not a quarterback guru. I don't pretend to know exactly all of the fine intricacies, but just watching both of their tape, I'm like, man, Nico fits it in some windows. Now, he played at Warren High School, which isn't phenomenal competition. Now, with him transferring to Long Beach Poly, we're going to get to see him play against some of the better schools in that Southern California region. So I'm excited for that. I think you'll learn a lot from his senior tape. But in terms of the skill set and upside, I mean, guy is off the charts. Like, he's going to be a lot of fun to watch at Tennessee. And, I mean, he's going to have my full attention and undoubtedly the rest of the SECs, as he's going to be I mean, you tell me, Chase, is he really the $8 million man? How legit is that with you being closer to it?
That I can't answer that. We
Okay,
can never
okay.
do it. Like, that might I will say I don't think that's ever coming out. Like, I don't know
Really?
we'll ever
Okay.
get a full public answer on that one. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I cannot say. So,
neither.
but you hear something all the time. Like, that's something you'll. I don't know. So that's all I can say is I don't know for sure. But it's also like when people throw that out there, or just like as an insult, or just like a shot at Tennessee, it's like he's posting he sees the stats. Like, part of it too is that like Heupel has a year of quarterback tape now for these guys, and he can just show what he did at Missouri with Drew Lock. He can show what he did with Dylan Gabriel at UCF. He can show what he did with Hendon Hooker, who we just brought in the middle of the year and was like, all right, 31 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. We're going to have more 75-yard touchdown plays, pass plays, than interceptions for this guy who we thought was just a full-on just run first option. Like, that's all we saw at Virginia Tech. And then he's just super efficient, and like, this Tennessee team was electric, and we're up on Alabama after the first quarter, put Georgia on the ropes after the first quarter. And it's just they don't have the personnel yet. Like, they don't have the bodies, they don't have the depth to go 4 quarters with the big boys, but they will. And like, if you are a top-tier quarterback prospect, it's like, yeah, whatever NIL you throw at me is like, Tennessee will have the boosters and have the money to do that. But like, they still want to play in the scheme. It's not like Jim Chaney was in there. Like, Nico is not coming, even if you like it, or whoever it is. Like, you can throw it at Arch or whatever, but like, there is a difference between throwing that NIL money with Jim Chaney there versus what Josh Heupel and Alex Golish and what this team's running. Like, the tape's there. Like, it does not lie that Nico knows if he plays in this scheme, he is going to put up preposterous numbers. Taven Jackson knows he's going to put up preposterous numbers if he's the guy before him. Like, the scheme sells itself. It's super simple, and I'm not saying that as a disparaging thing, but it's like it's a lot of like, we're going to attack your mismatches, we're going to do a lot of screens, we're going to do a lot of quick stuff, and our athletes are going to get put in space, and we're going to put so much pressure on you, we're going to snap the ball a bunch of times. Deal with it, and we'll see where the chips fall where they may. And that's, if you're a top tier quarterback, man, that's what you want to do. And I don't think this is going to stop. I don't think Nico is going to be the last big name. that Heupel brings in. I think this is going to be a yearly thing because this offense isn't going anywhere.
Yeah, and for people that have an issue with the NIL side of things, it's like, dude, look around. Like, because this number got out, I put out in quotation marks. Like, okay, cool. You don't think that someone like Bryce Young made in that stratosphere last year, if we're talking about $2 million being the yearly wage apparently for a guy like Nico? I mean, that's the world we're living in. And if Tennessee can afford to do that, like, that's going to be a chip that you can use now for recruits. That's a big deal. And so, I don't know. I think it's sort of a soft thing to be upset about because that's just the rules now. Like, if you can play within the rules and you're not going to get NCAA violations for it, like, let's go. I mean, if you want to be upset about that, Ole Miss, saddle up. Arkansas, saddle up. Like, you got to get guys on campus. Tell your boosters that care about the program to make it happen. So I think that's
it's also just not any different than what it was. Like, I think NIL is way less of a issue for college football than the transfer portal. Transfer portal windows is like, when I saw that, like, with Emmert going down, and like one of the first things with Ross Dellinger of SI pointing out that it might change is like a 3-month transfer window. And that's it. That changes everything. Like, that would be, I don't think NIL is a groundbreaking like change to the powers that be, like the Bamas, the Georgias, the whoever are still going to dominate the sport they were pre-NIL. But the transfer portal is a totally different thing. Like, if you put a window there and make it easier to keep up with these rosters and for fans to know that, like, here's the free agency period and that's it, and then these guys are on campus for at least 9 months, that changes a lot. Where if they can nail that down, that is far more of an issue of people just not knowing who's where and when a guy might leave, or like, oh, we have to talk publicly in a weird way until May 1st because we're so concerned about what's going to happen here. That is far more of a issue that I think needs to be ironed out before NIL. NIL is great. It's good for the kids, good for the players, good for everybody involved. Transfer portal, also good idea. But there just has to be guardrails on that, where it's just like, all right, here just give me a window. That's all we want. You can fix a lot of stuff. It's just, here's when you can do it. Here's when you can't. Done. Like, that's it.
Yeah. These are all good ideas. Like, everybody is thinking in the best interest of themselves. And we like to hope it's with the student athletes in mind too. But like, these are all good ideas and trending the right way. We just got to put some, like you said, some guardrails up to make sure that this is actually accomplishing what it's supposed to.
Yeah. JD, how can the good folks keep up with your work across YouTube and everywhere else?
Man, I appreciate it. So at JD Pickell is my Twitter handle. And then we're on YouTube with CFB with JD. So it's a lot of fun we do there with analysis and play breakdowns and all this, that, and the other, man. It's a good time. So feel free to check that out. But subscribe to this for sure. If you haven't already, subscribe to my man Chase.
Oh, well, I appreciate that, man. I appreciate that. JD, we'll have to check back in again soon. You stay safe out there, and I'll talk to you soon.